Rather than a sharp crack, a sickening, wet pop echoed over the hum of the cruiser's engine. It was instantly followed by a scream, a ragged, breathless wail from a 72-year-old woman shoved face first onto the wet asphalt. As red and blue lights strobe flashed across the rain-slicked street, they illuminated the badge of a rookie cop who had just made the worst mistake of his life. Believing he was roughing up a terrified grandmother during a busted taillight stop, he expected an easy win. He had no idea that her quiet, unassuming son was holding a phone across town, or that the single call he was about to make wouldn't just cost the officer his badge, it would obliterate the entire corrupt foundation of the city's police department. Beatrice Washington was a fixture in the working-class neighborhood of South Haven. At 72, Miss B, as the locals called her, had spent 40 years as a pediatric nurse before retiring to a life of church choir, community gardening, and baking peach cobblers that could stop traffic. She was a woman of deep faith, gentle hands, and a spotless record. She didn't even have a parking ticket to her name. It was a Tuesday night, just past 9 p.m. A light, freezing drizzle was coating the streets of South Haven in a shimmering, treacherous glaze. Beatrice was driving her 2008 Buick LaCrosse home from a late choir rehearsal. The heater in the old car was broken, so she was bundled in a thick wool coat, the collar pulled up around her ears. Her arthritis was acting up, making her joints stiff and her movements slow. 2 blocks from her driveway, a squad car pulled out from an alleyway, its headlights flooding her rearview mirror. Seconds later, the sirens wailed, and the light bar ignited the dark street in frantic flashes of red and blue. Beatrice's heart fluttered. She checked her speedometer. She was going exactly 25 miles per hour. Carefully, she signaled and pulled over to the curb beneath a flickering amber streetlight, shifting the car into park. She rolled down her window, the icy rain immediately stinging her cheek. Approaching the vehicle was Officer Kyle Mitchell, barely 24 years old, built like a linebacker, and brimming with the aggressive, nervous energy of a rookie, desperate to prove he was a tough guy. Behind him, leaning casually against the cruiser, was his training officer, Sergeant Dave Collins, a 15-year veteran who had long ago traded his moral compass for a cynical, corner-cutting complacency. "Hands on the wheel where I can see them," Mitchell barked, shining his high-lumen maglite directly into Beatrice's eyes, blinded and startled by the sudden shouting. Beatrice squinted, raising a trembling hand to shield her face. "Officer, please." "The light," I said, "hands on the wheel." Mitchell yelled louder, his hand dropping to the butt of his service weapon. "I'm sorry. I'm a bit hard of hearing," Beatrice said, her voice shaking but polite. She placed both hands firmly at 10 and 2. "Why did you pull me over, young man? Your passenger side tail light is out. License, registration, and proof of insurance." "Now, of course," Beatrice murmured. She slowly moved her right hand away from the steering wheel and reached toward the glove compartment. "Hey, I didn't say move," Mitchell shouted, his voice cracking with adrenaline. "My registration is in the glove box, officer. I'm just getting—" "Stop reaching. Keep your hands where I can see them." The contradictory commands confused her. How could she get her papers without moving her hands? "I'm just opening the compartment, sir," she said, her fingers grazing the latch. Mitchell didn't wait. Fueled by poor training and an ego that demanded absolute, instant submission, he yanked the driver's side door open. "Out of the car. Step out of the car right now." "What? Why?" "I'm an old woman. It's freezing out here." Mitchell lunged forward, grabbing Beatrice by her left wrist and the collar of her wool coat. He didn't guide her out. He hauled her out. The sheer force lifted the 72-year-old woman off her seat. Her sensible orthopedic shoes hit the slick pavement, and her knees immediately buckled. "Stop resisting!" Mitchell screamed, the mantra of an officer covering his tracks in real time. "I'm not resisting. You're hurting me," Beatrice cried out, terror gripping her chest. Sergeant Collins finally pushed off the cruiser and ambled over, making no move to de-escalate. "Just cuff her, Mitch. Stop playing around." Mitchell wrenched Beatrice's left arm behind her back. Because of her severe arthritis, her shoulder joint had very little mobility. When she involuntarily gasped and tried to adjust her posture to relieve the agonizing pressure, Mitchell perceived it as defiance. He shoved her forward against the side of the Buick, then swept her legs out from under her. Beatrice went down hard on the wet asphalt. Mitchell dropped his knee squarely onto her upper back, pinning her. Then, he grabbed her right arm, pulling it violently backward and upward to meet her left wrist for the handcuffs. There was a loud, wet pop. Beatrice's scream tore through the quiet neighborhood. It was a sound of absolute, unadulterated agony. Her right shoulder had been completely dislocated, the humerus bone torn violently from its socket, tearing the rotator cuff and ligaments in the process. "My arm! Oh Lord, my arm!" she wailed, tears mixing with the freezing rain on the pavement. "Quit faking, lady," Mitchell sneered, clicking the steel cuffs shut around her wrists, locking her dislocated arm into a position of excruciating torture. A few porch lights flicked on down the street. Neighbors peered out through their blinds. Collins walked up, looking down at the sobbing elderly woman in the mud. He shone his flashlight on her face, recognizing her. "Damn it, Mitch," Collins muttered, a brief flash of annoyance crossing his face. "That's Miss Washington. She lives up the block." She was reaching Sarge. She resisted. Mitchell stood up, breathing heavily, chest puffed out. "Yeah. Well?" Collins sighed, pulling out his radio. "Dispatch, we need a bus at our location. Suspect took a fall during apprehension, complaining of shoulder pain." He looked down at Beatrice, who was hyperventilating, the pain sending her into the early stages of shock. He didn't uncuff her. He didn't help her up. He just walked back to the cruiser to stay out of the rain. Oak Ridge General Hospital's emergency room was chaotic, smelling of bleach, stale coffee, and despair. Beatrice Washington lay on a gurney in Trauma Bay 3. Her wool coat had been cut away. Her face was ashen, her lips blue. Even more appalling, her left wrist was still handcuffed to the metal rail of the hospital bed. The attending physician, Dr. Eris Thornwaite, Dr. Eris Harrison, had argued furiously with Officer Mitchell to remove the cuff so they could properly sedate her and reduce the shoulder, but Mitchell had smugly cited department protocol for hostile detainees. At 10:45 p.m., the ER doors slid open, and a man walked in. Roland Washington didn't look like a threat. At 42, he was of average height, wearing wire-rimmed glasses, a slightly rumpled gray suit, and a damp tan trench coat. He had the quiet, exhausted demeanor of a mid-level accountant who had just worked a 14-hour shift. But Roland was not an accountant. He approached the reception desk, his voice low, steady, and devoid of the panic most family members exhibited. "I was called about my mother. Beatrice Washington." The nurse pointed toward Bay 3. "The officers are still with her, sir. You might have to wait." Roland didn't wait. He walked past the desk, his footsteps silent on the linoleum. As he neared the bay, he heard laughter. It was Mitchell and Collins, leaning against a medical cart, drinking bad coffee from styrofoam cups. Roland stepped into the bay. He saw his mother. He saw the unnatural, grotesque angle of her right shoulder under the thin hospital gown. He saw her eyes, glassy with pain and heavy sedatives, and then he saw the steel handcuff chaining her left wrist to the bed rail. Something inside Roland Washington's chest went perfectly, completely still, the kind of stillness that precedes a devastating earthquake. "Mom?" he whispered, moving to her side, gently touching her forehead. "Roland." Beatrice slurred, a tear escaping the corner of her eye. "I didn't do anything wrong, baby. I was just trying to get my papers." "I know, Mama. I know." Roland's voice was velvet, soothing. "Hey, pal. You can't be in here." Mitchell barked, tossing his coffee cup into a bin and stepping up to Roland. "This is an active police investigation." Roland turned slowly. He didn't look at Mitchell's face. He looked at his badge. "Mitchell, K badge #4 Atonanen." He looked at the sergeant. "Collins, D, badge #21 Ezra 4. An investigation into what, exactly?" Roland asked. His voice didn't rise. It was chillingly conversational. Resisting arrest, failure to comply, and assaulting a police officer, Mitchell recited smoothly. It was the standard holy trinity of charges used to justify excessive force. Roland looked at the handcuff. "Uncuff her," Mitchell scoffed. "Not happening. She's a flight risk and a danger to officers." Roland looked at the 2-4-year Old cop. Then at the 7-2 year, old woman heavily sedated with a destroyed shoulder. You are claiming that an elderly woman, currently under heavy narcotics with a grade 3 shoulder dislocation, is a flight risk? Protocol is protocol, Collins chimed in, crossing his arms. Look, buddy, she should have just complied. Let this be a lesson. Now step outside before we arrest you for interfering. Roland didn't argue. He didn't scream. He didn't threaten them with lawsuits or yell, "I pay your salary," like most angry citizens did. He simply reached into his trench coat pocket, pulled out his smartphone, and took 3 highly detailed, flash-enabled photographs. One of his mother's face, one of the dislocated shoulder, one of the handcuff chaining her to the bed, making sure Mitchell and Collins were clearly visible in the background. "Hey, put that phone away." Mitchell lunged forward. Roland stepped back smoothly, slipping the phone into his breast pocket. He locked eyes with Sergeant Collins. The older cop suddenly felt a strange, cold prickle on the back of his neck. There was something deeply unsettling about how calm this man was. "I'm going to step outside to make a phone call," Roland said quietly. "By the time I walk back into this room, that handcuff will be off her wrist. If it is not, I promise you, neither of you will ever wear a uniform again." Mitchell laughed out loud. "Yeah? Who are you gonna call? The mayor? Get out of here, loser." Roland turned and walked out of the ER bay, pushing through the double doors into the freezing rain of the ambulance bay. He stood under the concrete awning. He pulled out his phone. He bypassed his recent contacts, opened a secure, encrypted dialer app, and dialed a Washington, D.C. area code. It rang twice. "Washington," a sharp, female voice answered. It was late on the East Coast, but Sarah Jenkins, Deputy Director of the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, was always awake. "Sarah." "It's Roland," he said, staring out into the dark, rainy night. "Roland? Good God, I thought you were on sabbatical. How's South Haven? How's your mother?" "South Haven is corrupt," Roland said, his voice dropping an octave, losing all its warmth. "And my mother is currently handcuffed to a hospital bed with a torn rotator cuff and a dislocated shoulder, courtesy of the local police department." The line went dead silent for 3 long seconds. When Sarah spoke again, the friendly banter was entirely gone, replaced by the lethal efficiency of a federal predator. "Tell me everything." Roland relayed the facts. The traffic stop. The excessive force. The falsified charges they were already planning. The refusal to uncuff her for medical treatment. "Roland," Sarah said softly, "you are the chief legal counsel for the DOJ's Civil Rights Division. You have literally written the federal guidelines on prosecuting police brutality. Are these local cops out of their goddamn minds? They don't know who I am. To them, I'm just a nobody in a cheap suit." "What do you need?" she asked. "I don't want a lawsuit, Sarah. A civil suit just pays me with taxpayer money and leaves these guys on the street. I want the precinct. I want the captain. I want every single text message, dash cam, body cam, and disciplinary record in that department seized before the sun comes up." "Done," Sarah said. "I'm waking up the regional FBI field office right now. The U.S. attorney for the district owes me a favor. We'll have a federal injunction and search warrant signed by a federal judge by 3 a.m. "Thank you, Sarah." "Roland?" "Yes." "Burn them to the ground." Roland hung up the phone. He took a deep breath of the freezing air, letting it cool the white-hot rage burning behind his ribs. Then, he turned and walked back into the ER. The next morning, at the 4th Precinct of the South Haven Police Department, the mood was remarkably light. Captain Thomas O'Grady was sitting in his glass-walled office, sipping a protein shake. O'Grady was a slick, politically savvy cop who had run his precinct like a personal fiefdom for 10 years. If his boys got a little rough, he looked the other way. If evidence went missing, he blamed administrative errors. The system protected the system. Out in the bullpen, Officer Mitchell and Sergeant Collins were typing up their official incident reports. "Make sure you emphasize that she made a sudden, aggressive movement toward the glove compartment," Collins instructed, not looking up from his keyboard. "State that you feared for your safety, believing she might be reaching for a concealed weapon." "A weapon?" "She's 72, Mitchell chuckled, though he typed it anyway. Doesn't matter. It justifies the physical extraction. And write down that she fell due to the wet pavement while aggressively resisting the application of handcuffs. We didn't throw her. She slipped. Got it? Got it, Sarge. Bulletproof. Mitchell hit print. He felt invincible. They had left the hospital around midnight, eventually uncuffing the old woman only because the attending doctor threatened to call the local news. But the charges of resisting arrest had been filed. The narrative was set. The old lady would take a plea deal for a misdemeanor, pay a fine, and that would be the end of it. It always was. At exactly 8:45 a.m., the precinct's dispatch radio system emitted a loud, continuous tone, followed by dead silence. At the same moment, every computer monitor in the bullpen blinked black. Then, a stark white federal seal appeared on the screens, accompanied by bold text, Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, system locked pursuant to federal warrant. A murmur of confusion rippled through the precinct. Hey, what the hell is wrong with the network? Collins yelled, slapping his monitor. Inside his office, Captain O'Grady frowned, jiggling his mouse. His desk phone rang. It was the chief of police, calling from headquarters downtown. Chief, what's going on with the O'Grady started? Tommy, listen to me very carefully, the chief interrupted. His voice laced with a panic O'Grady had never heard before. Do not touch your computers. Do not shred anything. Do not let anyone leave your building. What? Chief, what are you talking about? The FBI just walked into headquarters with a federal judge's order. They bypassed internal affairs entirely, Tommy. The feds are here. They are seizing the entire city's database. Body cams, dispatch logs, emails, personnel files, everything. O'Grady stood up, his stomach plummeting. Why? Based on what? They cited a civil rights investigation, excessive force and conspiracy to falsify official records. Tommy, what the hell happened in your precinct last night? Nothing. O'Grady stammered, his mind racing. We had a routine night. A couple of drunks, a domestic, a traffic stop on an old lady. Who was the old lady, Tommy? I don't know. Some woman named Washington. Beatrice Washington. She resisted. The chief went dead silent on the line. Chief? Tommy. You stupid, arrogant son of a bitch. The chief's voice was a whisper of pure dread. What? Do you know who Beatrice Washington's son is? Some guy named Roland. He was at the hospital. Just some civilian. Looked like a wimp. Roland Washington is the chief legal counsel for the United States Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, Tommy. He is the man who prosecutes corrupt police departments for the federal government. He has the ear of the Attorney General, and your idiot cops just broke his mother's arm and tried to frame her. All the blood drained from O'Grady's face. The protein shake in his stomach curdled. He looked out through the glass of his office, watching like oblivious to the nuclear bomb that had just detonated over their heads. They're coming for you, Tommy, the chief said quietly. And I can't protect you. The line clicked dead. Before O'Grady could even put the receiver down, the heavy glass double doors of the 4th precinct buzzed and swung open. A dozen men and women in dark windbreakers with FBI emblazoned on the back flooded into the lobby. They were flanked by 2 U.S. Marshals. They didn't stop at the front desk. They fanned out with military precision, immediately blocking the exits and taking positions behind the officers' desks. Leading the pack was a tall, sharp-featured federal agent holding a thick stack of manila folders. Right beside him, no longer looking like a rumpled accountant, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit and a look of absolute glacial fury, was Roland Washington. The bullpen went dead silent. The clacking of keyboards stopped. The laughter died in Officer Mitchell's throat as he looked up and recognized the man from the hospital. Roland's eyes swept the room, pausing on Collins, then locking onto Mitchell. The young cop suddenly felt the temperature in the room plummet. He had thought Roland was prey. Looking at him now, surrounded by federal agents, Mitchell realized with a sickening lurch in his gut that he had dragged a sleeping dragon into the light. Roland walked slowly toward the center of the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. My name is Roland Washington, he said. The words echoing in the silent precinct. And as of this exact moment, this entire department is under federal investigation. The silence in the 4th precinct was heavy enough to crack the foundation. Typewriters hummed idly. Radios hissed with static. 30 pairs of eyes stared at the man in the charcoal suit who had just declared war on their house. Special Agent William Croft, a 20-year veteran of the FBI with silver hair and a face carved from granite, stepped up beside Roland. He held up a thick manila folder, the federal seal stamped vividly on the front. Captain Thomas O'Grady. Croft boomed, his voice echoing off the linoleum floors. The door to the captain's glass office opened slowly. O'Grady emerged, his face a sickening shade of gray. He tried to muster the authoritative swagger that had kept him in power for a decade, but his knees betrayed him with a slight tremble. "Agent Croft," O'Grady said, his voice tight. "This is highly irregular. Professional courtesy dictates that a local IA division—" "Professional courtesy went out the window at 9:15 last night, Captain," Roland interrupted smoothly, stepping forward. He didn't yell. His voice was devastatingly calm, the tone of a surgeon about to make a fatal incision. "You are being served with a Title 18, Section 242 federal warrant, deprivation of rights under color of law. Your precinct is now an active federal crime scene." "For what?" O'Grady protested, spreading his hands. "A traffic stop? A resisting suspect? You can't just walk in here and—" "I can. And I have," Roland said. He turned to the room at large. "Nobody touches a keyboard. Nobody touches their personal cell phones. Hands off your holsters, step away from your desks, and line up against the west wall." Down in the bullpen, Officer Kyle Mitchell felt his stomach violently bottom out. The cocky sneer he had worn since he put on the badge melted into raw, unadulterated terror. He looked at Sergeant Dave Collins, desperately seeking the older cop's reassurance. But Collins wasn't looking at him. Collins was staring at Roland Washington like a man looking at a firing squad, sweat beading on his forehead. "Sarge," Mitchell whispered, his voice cracking. "Sarge, what do we do?" "Shut up, Kyle," Collins hissed through his teeth. "Just shut your mouth and ask for a union rep." Agent Croft snapped his fingers. 4 FBI agents moved methodically through the room, collecting personal cell phones, department-issued radios, and sidearms. When an agent approached Mitchell, the young cop's hands shook so badly he nearly dropped his Glock 19 onto the floor. "Officer Mitchell," Roland said, walking slowly down the aisle of desks until he stood directly in front of the young cop. He looked down at Mitchell's name tag. "You told me last night I was a loser. You asked me who I was going to call." Mitchell swallowed hard. He couldn't meet Roland's eyes. "Sir," she was resisting. "Save it for your deposition," Roland said. His voice dropping to a whisper meant only for Mitchell and Collins. "You broke a 72-year-old woman's arm because she didn't move fast enough for your ego. You chained her to a hospital bed while she wept. And then, you walked in here this morning and falsified a police report to cover your tracks. I have nothing to say without representation," Collins interjected, his jaw set stubbornly. "That is your right, Sergeant," Roland replied, a cold smile touching the corners of his mouth. "But right now, I don't need you to talk. I need your data." Roland turned back to Captain O'Grady. "Captain, we require immediate access to your server room. We are imaging every hard drive, every body cam upload, and every dash cam file from the last 48 hours. O'Grady's Adam's apple bobbed. He glanced nervously toward the back corridor. "The servers. Well, we've been having network issues this morning. A power surge, I think. The IT department was running maintenance." Agent Croft narrowed his eyes. "A power surge? Are you telling me the footage from last night might be compromised?" "It's possible." O'Grady lied smoothly, a greasy layer of confidence returning. He had called the precinct's IT administrator the second the chief had warned him. "Wipe the 9 p.m. block," he had ordered. "Scrub Mitchell's cruiser cam and body cam. Say the rain shorted the equipment." Without the footage, it was just the word of 2 decorated cops against an old woman and her angry son. "Excuse me." The voice came from the back of the bullpen. A thin, pale young man with thick glasses and a Star Wars lanyard around his neck stepped out from the hallway leading to the server room. It was David Finch, the precinct's civilian IT technician. "David, get back in your office," O'Grady barked, his face flushing red. Finch ignored him, He walked straight toward Roland Washington and Agent Croft, his hands trembling as he clutched a small silver flash drive. 10 minutes ago, Captain O'Grady ordered me to remotely access the server and permanently delete the video and audio files associated with Officer Mitchell's cruiser, Unit 42, Finch said, his voice shaking but loud enough for everyone to hear. The color completely drained from O'Grady's face. "Finch, you little rat, you're fired. Shut your mouth." "Let him speak," Agent Croft commanded, signaling 2 agents to flank the captain. Finch swallowed hard, holding out the flash drive to Roland. "I didn't delete them. I've worked here for 3 years, Mr. Washington. I've watched these guys alter reports. I've watched them wipe footage when they rough people up. I couldn't do it to an old lady. I backed up the raw, unencrypted files onto this drive before the FBI locked the system down." Roland took the flash drive. It felt heavy in his palm, a tiny piece of metal containing the undeniable truth. He looked at Finch, his eyes softening for the first time that morning. "Thank you, David. You just did your city a massive service. We'll ensure you fall under federal whistleblower protection." Roland turned slowly back to O'Grady, who was now backed against the glass of his office, looking like a trapped rat. "Conspiracy to destroy evidence. Obstruction of justice. Deprivation of civil rights." Roland listed the charges as if reading a menu. Agent Croft. Place Captain O'Grady, Sergeant Collins, and Officer Mitchell under federal arrest. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed through the bullpen. It was a sound Mitchell and Collins had produced 1,000 times, but as the cold steel locked around their own wrists, the reality of the nightmare finally set in. Mitchell began to openly weep, his knees buckling, while Collins stared blankly at the floor, his career dissolving into ash. Oak Ridge General Hospital was quiet in the mid-morning light. The harsh fluorescent bulbs of the emergency room had been traded for the softer, sunlit glow of a private recovery suite. Roland sat in a plastic chair beside the bed, holding his mother's uninjured left hand. Beatrice Washington looked small among the white sheets. Her right arm was bound tightly to her chest in a heavy immobilizing sling, the shoulder heavily bandaged where the orthopedic surgeon had to manually reset the bone and repair the torn ligaments. She was bruised, exhausted, and deeply traumatized. "I thought they were going to kill me, Artie," she whispered, her voice raspy from the intubation tube they had used during the brief surgery. "I really did. When he threw me down, I saw the hatred in his eyes, over a taillight." "I know, Mama," Roland said softly, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. "But they will never put their hands on another person again. I promise you that." "Did you call their boss?" she asked innocently, unaware of the nuclear hurricane her son had unleashed upon the city. "I did," Roland replied, a tight, sad smile touching his lips. "It's being handled." His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a secure line. He kissed his mother's forehead, promised to be right back, and stepped out into the hallway. "Washington," he answered. "Roland, it's Sarah." The voice of the DOJ deputy director came through, crisp and urgent. "I'm looking at the data from the flash drive and the preliminary server dumps your team sent over." "Roland, it's worse than we thought." "How much worse?" Roland asked, leaning against the hospital wall, the cold professionalism settling back over his shoulders. "It wasn't an isolated incident," Sarah explained. "Mitchell didn't just snap. We reviewed the body cam footage of your mother's arrest. It's pristine, brutal, and completely unprovoked. But what we found on their internal servers is a systemic nightmare." "Roland, they had a quota." Roland frowned. "Quotas are illegal in this state. They didn't call it a quota. They called it the harvest. We found a hidden group chat on their personal phones, linked to a precinct-wide server. Collins was the admin. They specifically targeted older minority drivers in South Haven for minor traffic infractions." Roland felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Why? What's the incentive?" "Civil asset forfeiture and municipal fines," Sarah said, disgust evident in her voice. O'Grady was running the precinct like a mafia protection racket. They would pull over vulnerable citizens, people they knew wouldn't or couldn't fight back in court. They'd invent a reason to search the car, confiscate cash under the guise of suspected drug proceeds, and impound the vehicles. The precinct gets to keep a percentage of the seized assets to fund departmental needs. Es lashfun, Roland model. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. O'Grady used it for unauthorized tactical gear, luxury precinct renovations, and off-the-books bonuses. They targeted the elderly because they didn't fight back physically. If they got confused or moved too slow like your mother did, the officers would escalate, claim resisting arrest, and pile on the fines. It's a massive extortion ring operating under a badge. Roland closed his eyes, visualizing the sheer number of lives ruined, savings accounts drained, and bones broken just to feed a corrupt captain's ego and wallet. Who else knew? That's the kicker, Sarah said. We found an email chain from O'Grady to the chief of police and the mayor's chief of staff. They knew about the disproportionate arrest rates in South Haven. The mayor's office was turning a blind eye because O'Grady's precinct was generating record-breaking municipal revenue for the city. They were balancing the city budget on the backs of terrified grandmothers. Roland's grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles turned white. The initial anger he felt last night had burned hot and fast. Now, it was replaced by something much more dangerous. A chilling, calculated resolve. This wasn't just about breaking two bad cops anymore. It was about pulling the entire poison tree out by the roots. Sarah, I need a federal grand jury convened by Monday, Roland said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal register. I want subpoenas for the mayor, his chief of staff, and the chief of police. Freeze all municipal accounts tied to the 4th Precinct's forfeiture funds. Roland, going after the mayor. That's going to turn this from a police brutality case into a massive political war, Sarah warned. The local police union is already mobilizing. They're going to paint the FBI as overreaching. Let them, Roland replied flatly. I have the body cam footage of a rookie cop shattering an old woman's shoulder while his sergeant watched. And I have the text messages of them laughing about it. The union can defend that in front of a federal judge if they want to. What about Mitchell and Collins? Leave them in federal holding, Roland instructed. Let them marinate. By tomorrow morning, Mitchell will realize that the brotherhood he thought he belonged to is a myth, and that O'Grady is going to use him as a scapegoat. Mitchell will break. He'll roll on Collins. Collins will roll on O'Grady, and O'Grady will give us the mayor. You're building a RICO case, Sarah realized, a note of awe in her voice. Racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations. You're prosecuting a local police department like a crime syndicate. Because that's exactly what they are, Roland said, looking through the glass of the hospital door at his sleeping mother. They picked the wrong city. They picked the wrong neighborhood. And they definitely picked the wrong grandmother. He hung up the phone. The trap was set. The federal machine was awake, hungry, and moving with terrifying speed. The men who had ruled South Haven with iron fists and unchecked violence were about to find out what real power looked like. And it wasn't wearing a badge, it was holding a briefcase. The federal holding facility in downtown was a brutalist concrete structure devoid of natural light, warmth, or sympathy. Inside Interrogation Room A, the air was stale, smelling faintly of floor wax and cold sweat. Officer Kyle Mitchell sat at a steel table, his hands shackled to the heavy metal loop bolted to the surface. He had been staring at the gray wall for 6 hours. The adrenaline that had fueled his arrogant swagger the night before had completely evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, trembling panic. He was 24 years old. He had wanted to be a cop, to command respect, to wear the badge like a shield against the world. Now, stripped of his belt, his gun, and his uniform shirt left only in a thin white undershirt and uniform trousers, he looked exactly like what he was. A frightened boy who had crossed the wrong man. The heavy steel door clicked and swung open. Roland Washington walked in, followed closely by FBI Special Agent William Croft. Roland carried a slim leather briefcase. He looked immaculate, rested, and utterly unbothered by the grim surroundings. He set the briefcase on the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down directly across from Mitchell. For a long minute, no one spoke. The silence was a deliberate, suffocating tactic. "Where is my union rep?" Mitchell finally croaked, his voice cracking. "Sergeant Collins said I shouldn't say anything until the union lawyer gets here." Roland opened his briefcase and withdrew a single sheet of paper. "David Campbell, the senior attorney for your police union, is currently sitting in a conference room down the hall." "But he isn't here to see you, Kyle." Mitchell frowned. his brow furrowing in confusion. "What do you mean? I pay my union dues. He has to represent me." "Mr. Campbell represents the collective interests of the South Haven Police Department," Roland explained, his voice smooth and conversational, entirely devoid of malice. "Right now, the collective interest of the department is to survive a federal RICO investigation. And to do that, a ship taking on water needs to throw its heaviest cargo overboard." Roland slid the piece of paper across the steel table. "This is a sworn affidavit submitted to the federal magistrate 20 minutes ago by Captain Thomas O'Grady. Read it." Mitchell leaned forward, his shackled hands clinking against the table. His eyes scanned the document. As he read the words, the color drained from his face until he was the shade of old parchment. O'Grady's statement was a masterpiece of self-preservation. It detailed how Officer Mitchell had a history of insubordination and poor impulse control. It claimed that Mitchell had acted entirely outside of departmental policy during the traffic stop with Beatrice Washington. Most damning of all, O'Grady wrote that Sergeant Collins had tried to physically restrain Mitchell, but the young officer had gone rogue, aggressively attacking the elderly woman in a fit of unexplained rage. "He's lying!" Mitchell screamed, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. He slammed his cuffed hands against the table. "He's lying! Collins didn't do anything. Collins told me to write the report. O'Grady told us to hit that neighborhood hard. He told us to find reasons to pull over the old folks because they pay the tickets without going to court." "I know," Roland said quietly. "But a federal jury doesn't know that. What a jury will see is a 24-year-old hothead who shattered a grandmother's shoulder and a decorated police captain expressing his deep sorrow over a rookie's tragic mistake." Mitchell began to hyperventilate. The sacred thin blue line, the unbreakable brotherhood he had been indoctrinated into, was a total lie. The men he had looked up to were perfectly willing to let him rot in a federal penitentiary for 20 years just to save their own pensions. "They're going to put you away, Kyle," Agent Croft chimed in, leaning against the wall, his arms crossed. "Deprivation of rights under color of law resulting in bodily injury carries a maximum sentence of 10 years. Obstruction of justice is another 10. You will be 44 years old before you see the sun again. And federal prison is not kind to former cops." Tears spilled over Mitchell's cheeks. The facade broke completely. He was sobbing, his chest heaving, as the reality of his ruined life crashed down upon him. "I just did what they told me," Mitchell wept, burying his face in his hands. "They called it the harvest. O'Grady said if we didn't bring in enough civil forfeiture cash, our squad cars wouldn't get repaired. He said it was a tax on the weak. I didn't mean to hurt her so bad. I pulled too hard. I'm sorry. Oh God, I'm so sorry." Roland didn't offer a tissue. He didn't offer sympathy. Empathy was for victims. The man weeping across from him was a predator who had finally been trapped. "Being sorry won't fix my mother's arm, and it won't keep you out of federal prison," Roland said, his tone turning to steel. "But I am not interested in the tail of the snake. I want the head. I want O'Grady, and I want the mayor who let him do it." Mitchell looked up, his eyes bloodshot and desperate. "What do you want from me?" "I want the ledger," Roland demanded. "IT technician David Finch gave us the digital files. We have the deleted server backups, but O'Grady isn't stupid enough to keep the financial trail of a multi-million-dollar extortion ring on a precinct hard drive. If he's funneling seized asset money to the mayor's office, there is a physical record, a shadow book." "Where is it?" Mitchell hesitated, swallowing hard. If he gave up the book, he was a dead man to the police force. But if he didn't, his life was over anyway. "It's not at his house," Mitchell whispered, leaning forward. "O'Grady has a brother-in-law, a guy named Paulie who runs a luxury car dealership out on Route 9. O'Grady keeps a red leather notebook in Paulie's floor safe. It has everything, every dollar we stole, every kickback sent to the mayor's re-election PAC, everything." Agent Croft pushed off the wall, pulling out his encrypted radio. "Dispatch a strike team to Route 9 auto sales. We need a warrant for a floor safe, right now." Roland stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He looked down at the ruined young man. "Agent Croft will type up your proffer agreement," Roland said. "You will testify before a grand jury. You will plead guilty to 1 count of felony assault under federal jurisdiction. You will spend 3 years in a minimum security facility, and you will never hold public office, carry a firearm, or wear a badge again for the rest of your natural life. Mitchell nodded weakly, staring at the floor. Okay. Roland paused at the door. When you get out, Kyle, I suggest you find a job where you actually serve people. Because playing the bully is officially over. The hammer of federal justice does not fall slowly when a RICO case is cracked wide open. It falls with the speed and devastation of a lightning strike. 48 hours after Beatrice Washington was dragged from her car, Mayor Richard Sterling was standing at a mahogany podium in the grand ballroom of the South Haven Country Club. It was a $1,000 a plate re-election fundraiser. The room was dripping with wealth crystal chandeliers, flowing champagne, and the city's elite rubbing shoulders. Sterling, a silver-haired politician with a booming voice and a perfectly practiced smile, was halfway through his keynote speech on law, order, and community safety. We have made our streets the safest in the state, Sterling roared into the microphone, to a round of polite applause. And we owe it all to the brave men and women of our police department. At the back of the ballroom, the heavy oak doors burst open. There was no polite knock. There was no quiet tap on the shoulder. Over 30 federal agents in full tactical gear flooded the room. The music screeched to a halt. Wealthy donors gasped and backed away, dropping champagne flutes that shattered on the marble floor. Walking straight down the center aisle, flanked by U.S. Marshals, was Roland Washington. Mayor Sterling gripped the edges of the podium, his practiced smile freezing into a mask of pure terror. What is the meaning of this? Who is in charge here? Agent Croft stepped onto the stage, pulling a heavy sheaf of warrants from his jacket. Richard Sterling, you are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy to commit extortion, and wire fraud. This is an outrage, Sterling sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red as donors whipped out their cell phones to record the spectacle. I am the mayor of this city. You have no jurisdiction. I have a federal grand jury indictment signed 30 minutes ago. Richard, Roland interjected, stepping up to the stage. He held up a thick, red leather notebook, secured in an evidence bag. And we have Captain O'Grady's ledger. We know about the $1.2 million in civil forfeiture funds you illegally laundered into your PAC. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. The cameras flashed, capturing the exact moment the powerful mayor of South Haven was handcuffed on his own stage, his career and freedom evaporating in front of his wealthiest constituents. Hard karma had arrived, dressed in a federal windbreaker. Across town, the karma hitting Captain Thomas O'Grady was even more poetic. For 10 years, O'Grady had used the twisted logic of civil asset forfeiture to legally rob the citizens of South Haven. He had seized the cars of grandmothers, the cash of working-class fathers, and the property of anyone too poor to fight back in court, claiming the assets were tied to criminal activity. Now, the federal government turned that exact same law against him. Because O'Grady had used the stolen funds to finance his lifestyle, every asset he owned was officially classified as the proceeds of a criminal enterprise. FBI agents descended on his sprawling McMansion in the gated suburbs. While O'Grady sat in a federal cell, his wife wept on the manicured lawn as federal tow trucks hauled away his prized $80,000 sports boat, his 2 luxury SUVs, and locked the doors to the house itself. They seized his bank accounts, his pension fund, and his investments. He was left with absolutely nothing, experiencing the exact same devastating helplessness he had inflicted on thousands of innocent people. Chief of Police Harold Briggs didn't wait for the handcuffs. The moment he saw the news of the mayor's arrest, Briggs drafted his letter of resignation, left it on his desk, and drove straight to the federal building to surrender, hoping a plea deal would save him from spending his twilight years in a penitentiary. Sergeant Collins, who had smugly watched Beatrice scream in agony, was convicted of conspiracy and evidence tampering. Because his crimes were committed under the color of law, the judge showed no mercy. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. In the span of a single week, the South Haven Police Department's corrupt regime was entirely decapitated. 2 months later, the city of South Haven settled the civil rights lawsuit filed by Roland on his mother's behalf. But Beatrice didn't want a massive payout of taxpayer money that would only hurt the city further. Instead, guided by Roland, the lawsuit forced the city into a federal consent decree. The entire police department was placed under strict oversight by the Department of Justice. The quota system was permanently banned. Body cameras were hardwired, so they could never be manually turned off or erased by precinct staff. The funds generated by traffic fines were redirected from police budgets to community education and infrastructure, removing the financial incentive to harass citizens. Spring eventually arrived in South Haven. The ice melted, and the streets dried. In the backyard of a modest home, Beatrice Washington was kneeling in the dirt, wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat. Her right arm was still stiff, and she had to use a specialized, lightweight trowel, but the physical therapy had worked miracles. She was planting heirloom tomatoes. Roland sat on the back porch, a laptop open on his knees, drinking a glass of sweet tea. He watched his mother work, the quiet hum of the neighborhood a stark contrast to the violence that had erupted on their street months prior. A police cruiser rolled slowly down the street behind the house. It paused by the fence. The officer inside, a newly transferred veteran brought in to help reform the precinct, rolled down the window. "Afternoon, Miss B," the officer called out respectfully, touching the brim of his hat. "Garden's looking beautiful." Beatrice stood up, wiping her forehead with the back of her wrist, and offered a warm, genuine smile. "Thank you, officer. Drive safe out there." The cruiser rolled on. Roland closed his laptop. The system was broken, perhaps permanently flawed in places. But in South Haven, the monsters had been dragged into the light and dismantled. It was a testament to the fact that absolute power is an illusion, easily shattered when the right person, armed with the truth and unyielding resolve, finally decides to push back. The story of Beatrice Washington and the dismantling of the South Haven Police Department is a stark, dramatic reflection of a very real crisis. In municipalities across the country, the misuse of civil asset forfeiture and the prioritization of revenue over public safety have turned protectors into predators, disproportionately targeting the vulnerable, the elderly, and minority communities. This narrative highlights the catastrophic damage inflicted when authority operates without accountability, and the systemic rot that can fester behind a badge. However, it also serves as a powerful testament to the impact of focused, relentless legal intervention. A single phone call from a son who understood the machinery of justice was enough to unravel decades of entrenched corruption. Hard karma prevailed not through vigilante violence, but through the precise, devastating application of the law. Beatrice's resilience reminds us that while trauma leaves scars, true justice forces institutional change, ensuring that the shadows where corruption thrives are permanently flooded with light.